Hey there guys, I'm Mr. Luna here, just stopping by to share another video lesson. So today I want to take the time to practice another FRQ. So today we'll practice this one FRQ from 2018. So that way you guys have a reference to this type of question. I know that it can seem a little intimidating whenever you look at a question like this, but it's actually not that difficult. So today we're going to break it down and we're going to tackle it down together. So I want you to actually work on this with me while we're working on it together. You're completing this assignment together with me, and by the time that you're done, go ahead and just submit it to me. Send me a picture, send me anything, just making sure that you're finishing it up so I can give you some extra credit for this. But today, we'll work on it together as a class. Please get something out or get your laptop so you can write, or perhaps another device that you have so you can type out. But today, we're working on this one question, and it does say, it's from 2018. It says, Part A, some of the survey questions related to student stress levels and student absences due to illnesses. The data on these variables are displayed below. Okay, so we have the data. It says number of absences due to illness, stress level. So the more absences due to illness, the more stressed you become, because typically you fall behind on work. It says, what is the most appropriate conclusion that can be drawn based on the figure above? Well, we can say that it's definitely correlated. We can say that the number of absences due to illness is correlated to stress levels. Explain how the data depicted in the graph are consistent with exhaustion level of general adaptation syndrome. So remember, the exhaustion level of the general adaptation syndrome is the third stage of the Hansen general adaptation syndrome, or the GAS. Remember, we covered this, and this one part they want us to cover, the general adaptation syndrome, which focuses on exhaustion, is the last stage, which is whenever you've dealt with the stress, with everything, you become a little exhausted and you simply don't care so much about the stressor anymore. So a researcher wants to conduct another study using the same variables, but wants to set it up as an experiment. Okay. So explain one reason that an institutional review board might not approve this new study. Okay, so we just need to talk about how the IRB might not approve the study. Perfect. So we know that stress and putting a person under stress is really not very ethical. So putting a person under stress just simply to get information out of the situation, it's not a very good thing to do. So it's not going to be one of the things that we focus on. Okay. Alrighty, buddy, I'll be right there. So let's go ahead and jump onto an example response. I did get the example response that a student wrote for this, so that way you guys can get an idea as to how people are writing. So it says, based on the figure above, it can be concluded that stress levels and number of absences due to illness have a positive correlation. So we said that they belong together. So this essentially means that as one gets more and more stressed, they are more likely to miss school due to illness. This is consistent with the exhaustion stage of the general adaptation syndrome, because in the exhaustion stage, one gets tired and worn out from what they are doing, and then begin to get ill or drop in performance. As student stress levels increase from being worn out from all of the tests and schoolwork that they must do, their body begins to give out on them, and they become ill, which is why they must miss school. An IRB might not approve this experiment using the same variables of stress level and number of absences, because it is not ethical. If it were an experiment, the researcher would essentially make students sick by putting various amounts of stress on them, which is not morally right. Perfect. So that's essentially what we set together before we actually dove into looking at this part. But let's go ahead and write our own. So we'll keep it very simple. So based on the figure above, it can be concluded that stress levels are definitely correlated with one another. So the more a student misses school, or we'll just say just like that. So based on the figure above, it can be concluded that stress levels are definitely correlated with one another. And then we can say this essentially means, or this means that the more stress students become, so the more stressed students become, the more they are likely to miss school due to feeling extremely tired and having too much work to take care of on top of what they must do at home. Perfect. So we can say this is consistent with the general adaptation syndrome proposed by Hans Seal, because in the exhaustion stage, one gets tired from what one is embarking on and begin to decline on performance. Perfect. As students, stress levels increase from being worn out from all these stressors. Their body begins to give out and they become ill, which is why they miss school. So then an IRB might not approve this type of experiment because it is unethical to put students under stress on purpose to simply get data. Not to mention, students will also underperform in school, which is not a very good thing. Awesome. So literally, we have just created our own version of the response that we thought about before we even read the example. So the example is just here so you guys can understand that this is the way that you need to be writing, because This is what gave this student all the points when they took this exam. So all we did was we read part A, right? We read part A. I'm sorry, it's actually on the other tab. We read part A, we interpreted it, we answered the questions together, we looked at the example, and then we created our own version of it. So perfect. Now we're going to jump into part B. So part B says, some of the survey questions related to risky behaviors, the results indicated that 90% of high school students' risky behaviors were influenced by social factors. So explain how each of the following may contribute to increase of risky behaviors. De-individuation. So de-individuation is just whenever you lose your individuality because you're part of such a large crowd that it is very easy for you to do stupid things that you necessarily wouldn't have if you wouldn't have that sense of de-individuation. So normative social influence, all that is the fact, or it's peer pressure. So normative social influence is just a nice way to say peer pressure. So peer pressure could definitely engage somebody into risky behaviors in many, many different ways. So here, all we need to do is explain how these two components contribute to increase of risky behavior. So let's see what this student did. Awesome. So now it says part B. De-individuation is the phenomenon in which people lose their sense of identity when in a big group. If the students were with a big group of people, they might lose their sense of individualism and begin to behave more recklessly and do things that they typically wouldn't do if they were on their own. As a result, risky behaviors would increase because experiencing de-individuation might just put those standards and morals. Normative social influence is basically peer pressure. It is when people do things to try to fit in and act normally. This may lead to fit in and may go to great extremes to do so. For example, if one is at a party where everyone is drinking alcohol, normative social influence may cause one to begin drinking as well, even though one wouldn't normally do it. Awesome. So they literally said what we said ourselves when we were talking about the question, part B. Now let's go ahead and take care of part B. Alright, so part B. The very first thing we want to do is just talk about de-individuation. So it says de-individuation is the phenomenon in which people feel a sense or lose a sense of individuality when part of a large group. So now, if students were in a big group, they might be prone to experiencing the individuation and acting unlike themselves at other given situations. As a result, risky behaviors would be or would increase because the individual does not feel a sense of individuality. So it is easier to act reckless. Perfect. So now we're going to talk about normative social influence. Normative social influence is peer pressure